15 doctors crowded the emergency room, their voices colliding in panic as Evelyn Kingsley, the billionaire matriarch whose serene smile stared down from every charity billboard in the city, lay gasping on a stretcher, lips turning blue, fingers clawing at her throat while life slipped through her despite their training, their equipment, their power. Cardiac arrest, one shouted, anaphylaxis, another argued, intubate. A third barked, yet nothing stopped the horrible, thin sound of choking instead of breathing, a sound Alia Brooks recognized instantly as she stumbled backward in shock, one hand clutching her pregnant belly, her housekeeping uniform still stained from hours of scrubbing floors no one ever noticed, her hair matted, her body aching with exhaustion, and in that moment she understood in a way the 15 doctors did not, that Evelyn Kingsley was suffocating from something unseen. Security tried to drag her away, a guard snarling for her to move back, until Damian Kingsley stormed into the room, eyes burning with fury and fear, demanding to know who she was, and with tears already spilling down her cheeks, Alia ripped free and spoke the truth no one wanted to hear. She was the only one there who knew what was killing his mother, a truth rooted years earlier on a winter night at the Kingsley Foundation Gala, when she'd rushed across a glittering ballroom she didn't belong in, feet burning in cheap sneakers, nausea twisting her stomach as chandeliers sparkled above guests wrapped in diamonds, when she collided with Damian himself, spilling champagne across his $1,000 suit and expecting humiliation, only to find unexpected gentleness in his tired eyes. A shared recognition of loneliness that deepened later in whispered conversations and overheard secrets about ruthless deadlines and corporate decisions that crushed people like her without a second thought. It was loneliness, not love, that pulled them together in a quiet hallway, and desperation that carried them into one reckless, nameless hour in a dark hotel room where two strangers tried to feel alive for 5 stolen minutes, an hour that ended by morning but followed Alia home into her tiny studio apartment, where the fridge hummed empty, eviction notices buzzed on her phone, and 2 bright pink lines on a pregnancy test shattered her breath. Proof that life had changed without asking permission, proof that rest was a luxury she could never afford, and proof that the woman now standing unnoticed in an emergency room, poor, pregnant, invisible, would one day hold the fate of the most powerful family in the city in her shaking hands. She stepped into the cold morning clutching a folder of prenatal papers, the sky far too bright for the fear churning inside her as her phone buzzed with another reminder, rent late, notice posted, and when she reached her peeling apartment complex and saw the yellow eviction warning slapped onto her door, the weight of it nearly buckled her knees. Her younger sister Maya opened the door before she could touch the paper, worry spilling from her eyes as she demanded answers Alia wasn't ready to give, because she didn't yet know how to raise a child when she could barely survive herself. And while Alia sat hours later staring at overdue bills and unanswered calls, across the city Damian Kingsley stood in his silent glass penthouse dismissing tabloid headlines about heirs and legacy until his mother's quiet words, and a cryptic message about lawyers and deadlines, tightened his gut with the sense of an approaching storm. That same evening, exhausted and nauseous, Alia headed for another shift only to be stopped by a black sedan whose occupants played a recording proving they knew she'd been at the gala and warned her to stop asking questions, leaving her shaking on the sidewalk with the chilling realization that her unborn child was no longer just a secret but a liability, a reason to stand her ground. And as she squared her shoulders and walked into the night determined to fight, fate was already tightening its grip elsewhere, because at the Winter Wellness Initiative Gala, Evelyn Kingsley stepped onto the stage, her confidence faltering for the first time, and before Damian could reach her, her words strangled into silence, her hands clawed at her throat, and she collapsed before a horrified crowd, the moment that would drag Alia Brooks back into the Kingsley world and change every life involved forever. Is she having a stroke? Move back, give her air. Voices collided as Damian Kingsley dropped to the floor beside his mother, panic detonating in his chest while Evelyn clawed at her throat, her face flushing and then draining to a terrifying blue, unable to speak, unable to breathe, as security flooded the stage, EMTs tore through the curtains, and camera flashes blinded the room. 15 doctors shouting over one another with contradicting diagnoses, stroke protocol, cardiac event, allergic reaction, pushing medications and IVs while chaos swallowed all reason, until Alia Brooks, an invisible janitor mopping marble floors at the edge of the madness, froze with a terrible clarity because she saw what none of them did. Evelyn wasn't clutching her chest, she was choking, just like the toddler Alia once watched nearly die at a daycare years ago until a janitor stepped in, and that memory snapped her instincts awake. They are doing it wrong, she's choking. Alia cried, dropping to her knees and shoving past grabbing hands and shouted orders, sliding behind Evelyn and pulling up and in with everything she had, once, twice, 3 times, until a sharp, wet gasp ripped the silence open and a small hard object shot from Evelyn's mouth onto the stage floor, freezing the room as Evelyn sucked in air and Damien collapsed beside her whispering for her to breathe, shock and tears in his eyes while late arriving Dr. Simone stared in disbelief at what 15 specialists had missed. Security stopped restraining Alia and stepped back as if she'd performed a miracle, and as Evelyn was stabilized, Damien looked up at the trembling woman who had saved his mother's life and whispered, "Who are you?" only for her to admit, voice cracking, that she was simply someone who saw the truth. Even as both of them noticed the expelled object vanish into the hands of a man in a black suit and Celeste Kingsley appeared to come at the edge of the crowd, a chill warning Alia that this was more than a medical emergency, that something darker was moving beneath it, and when Damien told her she was now his priority, she felt the truth settle in her bones. Saving Evelyn had just painted a target on her back, because by morning reporters were already shouting outside the hospital, shoving microphones toward her hooded face and pregnant belly, demanding to know if she was trained, if she knew the Kingsleys, if she was trying to profit from heroism. While Alia stood shaking in the glare of flashing cameras, realizing the world had found her, and it wasn't coming with mercy. Was it staged? Did the Kingsleys hire you? The accusations cut through the air as cameras crowded Alia Brooks until she froze in disbelief, the idea almost laughable when she could barely afford bus fare, let alone manufacture a miracle. And before the swarm could close in a sleek black SUV pulled to the curb and Jaden Price stepped out with a soldier's calm, calling her by name and guiding her away at Evelyn Kingsley's request, promising she wouldn't lose her job but her peace if she stayed. Upstairs, the hospital suite looked more like a luxury hotel than a recovery room, Damien standing sleepless and rumpled beside his mother's bed as relief softened his voice when Alia entered, while Evelyn, pale but steady, took Alia's hand and thanked her for running toward danger when no one else saw what was truly needed, offering repayment for a life saved, an offer that twisted Alia's heart because what she needed most, rent, food, safety for the baby growing inside her, felt impossible to say, and when she refused money, Evelyn instead offered work at Kingsley House, light duties, flexible hours, trust over questions, an opportunity Alia accepted with a nod that felt like both rescue and trap, but the real warning came downstairs, where Celeste Kingsley waited in a quiet marble corner, sharp and unreadable, thanking Alia for her assistance, while making it chillingly clear that heroes were inconvenient, discretion was required, and that the family already knew she was pregnant because no one entered their orbit without being vetted, a truth that left Alia nauseous and shaking as she barely made it to a bathroom stall to vomit. Overhearing Celeste's voice confirm her worst fear, her secret was no longer hers, and as she steadied herself at the sink, forcing focus on the job she desperately needed, she emerged to find Celeste gone and Jaden waiting by the elevator, informing her that Kingsley House expected her Monday morning, uniforms provided, trusted staff only, leaving Alia to wonder if what she'd earned was safety, or the kind of attention that never lets go. When Alia stepped out of the hospital into the sharp, bright cold, she felt weighted by eyes she couldn't escape as cameras still flashed and reporters lingered, held at bay only by Jaden's steady presence as he murmured a warning to stay off social media because people were already digging, words that made her stomach drop, because nobody's didn't trend and they certainly didn't save billionaires. And though Evelyn summoned her back the next day under the gentle excuse of gratitude, it was in that quiet hospital room, with warmth returned to Evelyn's face, that Alia was given not money but a small gold charm meant to protect those who walk through storms, along with a whispered confession that power in the Kingsley family too often blurred into cruelty, especially where Celeste was concerned, while Damien, sleepless and unraveling in his penthouse, replayed the chaos over and over until a grainy security photo of Alia in a restricted gala hallway stirred something familiar he couldn't name, a sense that pieces of that night were missing and that his aunt was already moving unseen pieces of her own. Alia returned home only to find her estranged father Reggie waiting with predatory charm and terrifying news that loan sharks were circling because he'd named her as a Kingsley asset, forcing her to lock her door and clutch her belly in the dark, whispering promises of protection to the life inside her even as fear clawed through her resolve. Later, Damien ordered Jaden to dig deeper after discovering her unexplained clinic visits, unaware that at the same moment Alia slipped Evelyn's charm around her neck and received a message from an unknown number containing the same surveillance image Damien held, proof she was being watched, until Monday morning brought her to the iron gates of Kingsley House, a world of stone and glass she entered with trembling hands, guided past marble and crystal into a small, clean room that felt like both refuge and cage. One quietly to trust Evelyn and Jaden but never Celeste, and finally sent to dust the upstairs library where nausea churned and the weight of unseen eyes pressed down on her, until she turned and found Damian Kingsley standing in the doorway, stripped of corporate armor, studying her as if she were an answer he hadn't yet learned how to ask. "You don't have to be afraid, you're safe here," Damian said softly, and Alia nearly laughed at the word safe in a house built from secrets and power, choosing instead to whisper that she wasn't afraid even as he stepped closer and calmly called her lie, the space between them thick with unspoken questions and a familiarity he couldn't place, until Celeste's sharp voice cut through the moment like a blade, reminding Damian of board matters and reminding Alia, with deliberate cruelty, that invisibility was rule number one in Kingsley House, a warning that lingered long after Celeste swept away. By midday nausea drove Alia to the staff bathroom where Evelyn later found her pale and trembling, offering quiet wisdom about listening to a woman's body and protecting oneself in a place that could take more than it gave. Words barely settled before chaos erupted again as Maya burst into the mansion demanding answers, her concern turning heads and hardening Celeste's disdain, forcing Alia to choose between family and survival as whispers spread and Celeste openly labeled compassion as chaos, only for Damian to shut her down with a single cold sentence. His mother trusted Alia, and that was enough, but the strain caught up to her on the staircase that afternoon when dizziness stole her strength and Damian caught her just in time, his concern turning dangerous when he noticed the prenatal bandage and quietly asked how far along she was, a question that shattered the fragile walls Alia had built because once people knew, her life was no longer hers, and though she pulled away without answers, it was already too late. By morning Dr. Simone was escorting her to a private suite at Evelyn's request, confirming the pregnancy with blunt honesty and warning that stress had turned Alia into prey barely holding on. While down the hall Damian stared at a family trust document he'd never been meant to see, the truth finally clear as a red-circled clause revealed Celeste's obsession with control through a female heir, a child she could own, a weapon disguised as legacy, and as Evelyn quietly confirmed what his father had hidden and his aunt was now scheming to claim, Damian clenched his fist by the window, realizing that Alia Brooks was no longer just under his roof, she was standing at the center of a war she never asked to enter. "If she thinks she can use my mother's near death as leverage," Damian began, rage tight in his chest, until Evelyn stopped him with a gentle hand and a warning to protect both himself and the girl already trapped in something far bigger than she understood, advice that followed him when he later cornered Alia in the west corridor and drew her into a small study where truths finally cracked open. 4 months pregnant, a father no longer in her life, a sealed paternity envelope planted on his desk to make him doubt her, and anonymous threats promising blood if she didn't leave, until Jaden burst in with proof she was being hunted and Damian realized the truth Celeste had been circling. The Kingsley fortune hinged on a female heir she could control, and Alia was suddenly central to that plan. Fear turned to terror that night when a disguised driver abducted Alia under the pretense of a medical appointment, locking her into a silent SUV that carried her away from the city to a windowless facility where Celeste finally revealed herself, cool and calculating, offering contracts that would erase Alia's rights in exchange for money and survival, admitting without denial that the gala night had been engineered, that Damian had been drugged, that this pregnancy was an inconvenience she intended to own, until Alia refused, standing broke and shaking but unyielding as the baby's mother, just as the doors exploded open and Damian stormed in with Jaden and authorities, threatening a war Celeste could no longer hide behind lawyers, and as they escaped into daylight Alia clung to Damian and finally whispered the truth that stopped him cold. He had been with her that night, he just didn't remember, and now as they rode back in stunned silence, frost streaking the windows and memories clawing at the edges of his mind, Damian turned to her and asked her to tell him everything, because whatever had been stolen from him that night had come back as a child, a betrayal, and a war neither of them could walk away from anymore. Damian frowned as Alia continued, her voice trembling as she explained how she'd been sent with champagne to a private room, how the door had closed behind her to reveal candles and music she hadn't expected, how she thought she'd walked into the wrong place until memory fractured and fear set in, forcing Damian to admit the truth he'd avoided, that after one drink in the VIP lounge, his memory went dark, a clean, terrifying gap he'd never been able to explain, until Alia whispered the words that made the car go silent, "Celeste drugged you," a conclusion she'd drawn from overheard hospital whispers about deadlines and from Celeste's later attempt to coerce her into signing away her child, a realization that cracked something inside them both as Damian acknowledged that what happened between them hadn't been a choice for either of them, and Alia confessed through shaking breaths that she'd believed he wanted her there, blindfolded and led into darkness by lies, leaving Damian stunned with horror and guilt as he vowed that Celeste had used them both, all to secure a female heir required by a hidden trust clause. When Damian revealed the tampered paternity envelope, wrong seal, forged scent, fabricated results declaring him not the father. Alia's chest collapsed with pain and doubt until Damien tore it open and named it for what it was, a lie crafted to divide them, insisting that if Celeste had gone to such lengths, it was because the real truth threatened her control. And as he gently took Alia's trembling hand and promised she wasn't alone, strength flickered back into her for the first time. Back at Kingsley House, Evelyn listened with sharp, sorrowful clarity, immediately recognizing the danger as her own creation, a legacy clause she'd hoped would die with her husband, forcing Damien to confront the realization that power had been hidden from him for years, not to protect the family name but to keep him chained to it. And as he looked at his mother with burning eyes and asked what else she hadn't told him, the weight of secrets settled heavily between them, promising that the truth, once unleashed, would change everything. Evelyn hesitated before speaking, her voice heavy with long-buried regret as she explained that Damien's father believed heirs were meant to be shaped, molded, and controlled, a philosophy Celeste had inherited whole, mistaking love for weakness and motherhood for ownership, a mindset that had always made her dangerous. Nausea curled in Alia's stomach as she asked if everything, including herself, had been planned, only for Evelyn to answer softly that Alia was the one variable Celeste could never predict, prompting Damien to insist they needed independent DNA testing far beyond Celeste's reach, a resolve that made Alia fearfully ask what would happen if the truth still rejected them. And when Damien replied that they would face it together, the word cracked her heart open. Later, alone in her small room, she barely had time to breathe before an anonymous message delivered blurry photos of Dr. Simone arguing in a hospital hallway, a test tube bearing Alia's ID being switched, and a chilling warning that trust itself was compromised, followed by the final blow. The real results weren't negative, they were missing, leaving Alia trembling as she realized someone wasn't merely lying but actively erasing truth, erasing her baby, even Damien's memory. And as she vowed softly to protect her child at any cost, unseen footsteps paused outside her door, proof she was never alone. By morning, the narrative had already been written for her, exposed through a vicious headline branding her a pregnant imposter targeting Kingsley heir, her name, face, finances, and home splashed across screens as Maya arrived in fury to confirm that the world had turned her into a villain, a liar, a gold digger, until Evelyn herself took Alia's hands and murmured that hatred always preceded loss of control, explaining the timing. Someone needed the public against her before the truth emerged, just as Damien stormed in, frantic and furious, denying any involvement in the leak while admitting Celeste's strategy was legal as much as it was cruel, poisoning public opinion so courts would follow, igniting a custody war over a child not yet born. The smear escalated into total erasure, appointments cancelled, exits blocked, crowds waiting, until a grocery run turned violent, insults hurled and a bottle shattering near Alia's feet, pain tearing through her side as panic stole her breath, only for Damien to reach her in time, shielding her body as security intervene and carrying her inside, where he gently set her down and asked if she was hurt. And when she looked at her trembling hand smeared with red and whispered his name in terror, the room fell silent, the danger no longer abstract but bleeding, real, and unstoppable. Something was wrong. Alia knew it before anyone said the words, and before Damien could respond, Dr. Simone rushed in at Jaden's call, dropping to her knees and guiding Alia through ragged breaths as panic stole the air from her lungs, her careful hands confirming it wasn't heavy bleeding yet warning with brutal honesty that stress was pushing her body past its limits and that if this continued she could lose the baby. The silence that followed sharp enough to shatter Alia's heart as Damien crouched before her, voice fierce and trembling as he promised he would fix this, that he would handle the world no matter how loudly it screamed, dismissing Simone's caution and his own reputation with a bitter laugh because reputations could be rebuilt but lives could not. And when he begged to protect her she had no strength left to refuse or accept, only to cling to his voice as the last solid thing in a collapsing room. Hours later, with security tightened and war quietly declared, Alia lay in bed feeling fragile and exposed until Evelyn came to her side, reminding her softly that feeling weak was not the same as being weak, that she had survived worse storms than Celeste, that mountains did not need to announce their strength to break what struck them. Yet fear followed Alia into the next days as headlines sharpened into knives. Rest proved impossible, and Damien's restrained fury seemed to vibrate through the walls, until on the third morning she insisted on a discreet follow-up at a trusted clinic, riding with Maya in a secured SUV that felt safe only until dread crawled up her spine, a sense of being watched crystallizing seconds before a black pickup swerved violently into their lane, another car boxed them in from behind, and panic exploded as metal screamed and the SUV spun, Maya clutching her arm and shouting for her to protect the baby while another brutal impact sent pain ripping through Alia's abdomen, her scream swallowed by chaos as she clutched her belly and begged through tears for her child to survive, tires shrieking, radios crackling, Jaden's voice breaking through the noise as the world tilted sideways and the danger finally revealed itself not as rumor or smear, but as something fast, lethal, and coming straight for her. "Do not stop, I'm 2 blocks away, keep moving," Jaden's voice crackled through the radio, but the words barely landed before the sedan surged forward and clipped the back of their SUV, sending it fishtailing out of control as Alia's lungs locked and her vision blurred, Maya's grip tightening around her hand while another impact slammed into them with bone-rattling force, glass erupting like shrapnel as the world flipped end over end, once, twice, 3 times, until the vehicle crashed upside down in a ditch and everything went eerily silent except for the ringing in Alia's ears and the pain blooming everywhere at once. Smoke curled from the dashboard as she blinked through blood and dizziness, croaking Maya's name again and again until panic clawed her chest when her sister didn't answer, Maya hanging unconscious beside her, limp in the seatbelt, while a deep, ominous ache paused low in Alia's abdomen and terror drove her shaking hands to her belly, begging her baby to be okay as sirens wailed closer and footsteps thundered down the embankment. Damian's voice breaking through the chaos as he tore open the crushed door, cut her free, and held her face with hands that trembled despite his control, fear naked in his eyes when she whispered about the baby. Everything blurred after that, stretchers, medics, Maya being carried out, Alia sobbing for reassurance that her sister was alive, Damian refusing to leave her side even in the ambulance, his voice dark with fury as he told her they weren't trying to kill her but to silence her, until the hospital lights swallowed them and Dr. Simone confirmed the miracle she barely dared to hope for, that the baby was still safe, relief shattering Alia into tears as Damian pressed his forehead to hers, confessing in a raw whisper that when he saw the car overturned he thought he was about to lose the only thing in his life that made sense without effort, that even if his memory failed him his soul knew the truth. Days later, exhaustion and fear still clinging to her bones, Maya finally woke with a weak joke and a softened smile, only for the fragile piece to fracture again when Damian revealed the crash was financed through shell companies not tied to Celeste, and before the name behind it could be spoken, the door opened to reveal Reggie, smiling too tightly, carrying guilt like a shadow, his presence turning Alia cold as he admitted the crash was a warning from collectors, men who didn't knock but hunted, and in that moment Alia understood with sickening clarity that the danger stalking her wasn't only born from power and legacy, but from a past she thought she'd escaped and a death that now had teeth. Reggie's voice dropped into something rough and ugly as he admitted he hadn't told the collectors anything outright, but they had sniffed around on their own, figured out Alia was living under Kingsley protection now, and assumed Billionaire money meant guaranteed payment, which only tightened the news around all of them, because if he didn't deliver, they would break all 3 of them without hesitation. Panic spiking through Alia as Damian finally stepped forward, calm and lethal, demanding to know exactly who these men were, forcing Reggie to describe people who bought judges, buried witnesses, and sent body bags instead of warnings, men who had given him an ultimatum, pay half by week's end or they would collect. The girl who saved the billionaire, a threat that made Maya gasp and Damian cut Reggie down with surgical coldness, accusing him of causing every danger Alia faced while Reggie snarled back that he'd raised her when no one else would, only to leave with a parting warning that men like Damian weren't built to save girls like her, leaving Alia shaking in his wake as Damian knelt beside her and quietly claimed her past as his responsibility now, even as she feared it might destroy him. Across the city, Celeste observed the fallout from the quiet luxury of a limousine, unfazed by news that Alia had survived the crash, amused rather than concerned as she instructed her agent to let the collectors continue playing with their prey because fear made girls foolish and everyone broke eventually, while she studied photos of Damian carrying Alia with a faint, pitying smile at his predictable weakness. Yet even as Celeste pulled strings, Evelyn moved in silence of her own, slipping away to meet investigative journalist Kendra Miles and confessing that the truth behind her near-death had been erased just like so many others, placing the first piece of evidence into Kendra's hands and warning that exposure was the only way to survive. Celeste poisoned, and back at the hospital, as night settled heavy and tense, Dr. Simone delivered the most dangerous revelation of all, proof that Alia's test had been sabotaged, that the paternity lab was compromised, and that Damian himself had been drugged the night of the gala, confirming that Celeste wasn't merely manipulating lives anymore but committing crimes, and when Damian vowed to destroy her, Simone stopped him with a single, chilling word, not yet. Simone's voice stayed steady as she explained that they needed leverage, real proof that would survive courtrooms and corruption, and when she revealed the existence of security footage from the private maternity clinic, the night Celeste had tried to coerce Alia into signing away her child, Alia's heart thundered with fear and hope intertwined, Damien tightening his hold on her hand as he vowed, with quiet ferocity, that no one would take their baby, a promise that felt fragile in a world where power sharpened its claws. Even as Evelyn moved in secret to place truth into the hands of a relentless journalist, the truth Alia could not escape arrived in a rush of pain and urgency, her body betraying fear as labor overtook her, Damien refusing to leave her side while Simone guided her through every breath and push, until with a final, primal scream, life broke through the chaos, a son, warm and crying, placed against her chest, Damien's tears falling freely as he touched the tiny hand that somehow felt like destiny, yet relief barely had time to settle before panic surged again, Simone backing orders as distress spiked and Alia was forced to push beyond exhaustion, beyond terror, until a second cry filled the room, softer but alive, a daughter, fragile and breathing, just as alarm suddenly screamed and the lights flickered violently, plunging the delivery room into confusion and fear, no smoke, no fire, only the chilling certainty that someone had triggered the system on purpose. Someone interfering at the most vulnerable moment of her life, as Alia clutched her newborns and realized that even birth itself had become another battlefield. Chaos swallowed the corridor in an instant, shouting voices, pounding feet, flashing lights, and in that single, disastrous gap, when the room meant to protect Alia stood briefly unguarded, someone slipped inside with practiced silence, leaving no trace until it was already too late. The light steadied, Simone's scream tore through the haze of exhaustion and tears, and the words "Where's the baby?" shattered Alia's world as she realized her newborn daughter was gone, stolen from the warmer during the blackout, ripped from the fragile seconds she had been alive. Alia's cry was raw and animal, a sound of pure loss as Damien backed orders to lock down the building and Jaden sent security racing through stairwells and exits, but every command felt useless against the truth Simone confirmed with shaking certainty. This wasn't an accident, the cameras had been caught, the fire alarm manually triggered, the escape routes unlocked by someone with insider access. Alia collapsed into Damien's arms, sobbing so violently she could barely breathe, clutching her son as if shadows might steal him too, while Damien swore through his own tears that he would find their daughter, that he would burn the world if that was the cost. Somewhere far from the alarms and panic, Celeste Kingsley cradled the stolen infant beneath a single lamp, humming softly, smiling with cold delight as she claimed the child as her key, even as back in the hospital Alia tried to rise from the bed despite tearing pain, screaming to be let go until her body finally betrayed her, shock setting in and oxygen pressed to her face. Damien was forced to leave her side, forced to choose movement over comfort, as he followed Jaden into the screaming halls, realizing with sick clarity that this had all been planned before the birth itself, that Celeste had orchestrated distraction, access, and escape because she saw the baby girl not as a life, but as an heir, a weapon, the key to the Kingsley fortune, and now Damien Kingsley was no longer just fighting his aunt, but racing against time to reclaim his child from a woman who believed power made her untouchable. Damien turned slowly, the truth igniting behind his eyes as rage settled into something cold and lethal. Celeste hadn't just stolen a baby, she had stolen leverage, a living claim to power, and while Jaden named it for what it was, Damien tasted blood with the force of his hatred and vowed they would take back what was theirs. In the delivery room, Alia drifted between pain and terror, her breath stabilized but her spirit fractured, her newborn son crying beside her as she forced herself upright and whispered for the daughter torn from her arms, finally voicing the horror she understood too well. Celeste needed the girl, the heir, the key. When Damien returned hours later, battered and empty-handed, the truth shattered what little hope remained, and Alia's scream, raw, ancient, so deep, cut through the room as Damien collapsed beside her, swearing through tears to bring their daughter home even as her grief hollowed her out. They barely had time to breathe before the message came, a video, dimly lit, Celeste rocking the stolen infant with cruel tenderness, taunting them with possession and issuing her ultimatum, come alone or lose the child forever. Fury erupted, fear followed, and the impossible choice split the room apart until Simone forced clarity through the chaos, insisting they meet arrogance with strategy, not surrender. As snow began to fall outside, quiet and deceptive, a plan took shape, one born not of hope, but of resolve, and while Celeste hummed in her distant mansion, believing herself victorious, Alia stood before the mirror hours later, bruised, broken, and unrecognizable, yet unyielding, preparing to walk into the lion's den because nothing, not fear, not pain, not death itself, would keep a mother from her child. Federal agents tipped off by Kendra and quietly backed by Evelyn melted into the glittering crowd, their hidden coms alive beneath tuxedos and evening gowns, because Celeste adored spectacle and Damien had chosen a stage so public she couldn't bend it without witnesses. As the convoy rode to a stop outside the hotel, Alia's breath trembled in her chest. She had been told to come alone, but Damien's voice cut through her fear, low and unmovable, reminding her that isolation was Celeste's weapon, not her protection. If Celeste saw him, Alia feared she would vanish again with their daughter, but Simon's calm warning grounded her. Celeste was always watching, always feeding on fear, and so Alia stepped out into the storm of camera flashes with her spine straight and her terror buried deep. Inside the ballroom, elegance masked impending war, violins whispered, chandeliers glimmered, and the wealthy pretended nothing was wrong, while every piece of the trap slid into place, until Damien claimed the stage and shattered the illusion by naming the crime, naming the stolen child, naming his daughter. Hope flared just long enough to hurt before the doors opened and Celeste entered in blinding white, serene and untouchable, cradling the baby like a trophy, spinning lies with practiced sweetness as she framed theft as mercy and threatened guardianship with a gloved hand hovering too close to the infant's face. The room teetered on the edge of chaos until Kendra's voice cut through the lies and the screens lit up with proof, fraud, tampering, payments, erased truths, ripping Celeste's mask away in real time, yet even exposed she clutched the child tighter, daring anyone to move. The ballroom froze, breathless and horrified, until a frail but unyielding figure appeared at the entrance, Evelyn Kingsley, shaking but unbroken, each step of her cane striking the floor like a verdict as Celeste's confidence finally began to crack. Evelyn's voice trembled but carried through the ballroom like a final judgment as she stripped Celeste of her authority, exposed the true air clause contract, and named every sin aloud: manipulation, attempted murder, kidnapping, until Celeste's composure shattered into naked fury and the illusion of control collapsed under flashing cameras and rushing federal agents. Desperation drove Celeste to flee with the baby still clutched in her arms, venomous enough to reach for a vile man to end the game forever, but Jaden's swift strike sent it skidding harmlessly away and Damien dove just in time to catch his daughter, cradling her like a miracle pulled from the edge of death. Relief hit Alia so violently it dropped her to her knees, and when Damien placed the tiny, trembling life back into her arms, she broke completely, sobbing prayers and promises into her daughter's hair while chaos dragged Celeste away, still smiling, still dangerous, whispering threats that drained the color from Damien's face and proved the victory was incomplete. Snow swirled outside as the family was rushed into hiding, Alia clutching both newborns in the armored SUV as if fear itself might try to steal them again, while Damien watched them with haunted eyes and Simone outlined a world where safety meant reinforced walls, controlled exits, and no mirrors to betray them. Inside the stark safe house, exhaustion gave way to a colder truth. Celeste hadn't lost, she believed she was regrouping, and when Jaden revealed she had escaped federal custody with help already waiting, terror settled into the room like a living thing. Alia pressed her daughter to her chest, knowing with absolute certainty that the nightmare wasn't over, that Celeste would come again, and as silence sharpened into paranoia and Damien armed himself with grim resolve, Alia lay awake relieving gloved fingers and whispered threats, until Maya appeared, bruised but unbroken, choosing to stand beside her, because survival, now, was no longer a solitary fight. Alia broke down before she even understood she was crying, the fear pouring out of her in ragged sobs as Maya pulled her close and anchored her with quiet certainty, reminding her she hadn't lost her daughter, that she had fought and won her back, but the victory felt fragile, temporary, like glass already cracking beneath Celeste's shadow. The brief comfort shattered when heavy thoughts echoed beneath the floorboards, turning the safe house into a trap as Jaden discovered Celeste's courier hidden in the crawl space, delivering a message colder than any weapon. The enemy no longer wanted just the girl, they wanted the boy too, because both children together sealed the bloodline and the power Celeste craved. Panic exploded into motion, Damien scooping up his son, Simone thrusting the girl into Alia's arms, alarms and orders colliding as they fled into the reinforced panic room, where terror finally caught up to her and the truth became unbearable. This had never been about one baby, or even two, but about using her body, her life, again and again, as a factory for heirs. By dawn, exhaustion gave way to resolve as intelligence revealed Celeste's next move, a grand public ceremony meant to humiliate Alia, manipulate the courts, and crown herself protector of a stolen legacy. But instead of running, Damien chose confrontation, turning Celeste's hunger for spectacle into bait. Inside the cathedral-turned-gilded stage, surrounded by power, cameras, and false reverence, Celeste unveiled her performance, painting Alia as unstable and herself as savior, until the spotlight burned down on the mother she meant to break. Aliyah stood trembling but unbowed, clutching her daughter as Damien demanded justice, knowing the final trap was set, and at this moment, this collision of truth, power, and desperation would decide whether their children grew up free or became trophies in someone else's war. Aliyah went completely still as Damien's growl cut through the cathedral, raw and feral, a vow of violence born from terror, and Celeste seized on it instantly, applauding softly as if she'd just been handed proof on a silver platter, twisting his fury into evidence of unfitness while the cameras drank it in. She spun her lie with practiced elegance, painting herself as savior and Aliyah as hysterical, Damien as drunk and dangerous, savoring the moment she thought she had finally broken them, until the air shifted and Evelyn entered, frail but unyielding, every step toward the altar a declaration of war. When Evelyn claimed Aliyah publicly as the true mother of the Kingsley heirs and exposed decades of Celeste crimes, fraud, corruption, kidnapping, poison, the cathedral erupted, and Celeste's mask cracked just long enough to reveal the monster beneath. Chaos became her cover as she ordered an attack, Evelyn collapsing in respiratory distress while Celeste fled, cornered at last with nowhere left to run except deeper into her own madness. The moment she raised the syringe to the infant, pressing it against delicate skin, the world seemed to stop, Damien frozen, Aliyah screaming, the crowd breathless, until Jaden's warning shot shattered the illusion of her control and the second bullet disarmed her completely. Damien tore his daughter from her grasp, placing her safely back into Aliyah's arms as Celeste crumpled, still smiling, still promising ruin even as agents dragged her away. Relief crashed over Aliyah in sobs as she clutched her baby, surrounded by those who had fought beside her, but it was short-lived. The discovery of a single message, "Round 2 begins now," confirmed what her instincts already knew. Celeste had never been the true architect, only a vicious piece on a much larger board, and as the convoy carried them back into the night, Aliyah held her children tighter, understanding with bone-deep certainty that the war for their lives was far from over. The words "Round 2" settled over them like a threat made solid, and as Damien explained there was another player, one far colder, far more calculated. Aliyah felt fear tighten her chest even as something fragile and new took root in her trust of him, a trust she didn't pull away from when he reached for their daughter's tiny hand and swore no one would touch their children while he still breathed. Back at the safe house, security thickened into something militarized, yet safety proved to be an illusion as Damien discovered Kingsley Global collapsing from the inside, stocks plummeting, whispers of fraud spreading like fire, revealing the true enemy at last, Rowan Kingsley, the exiled uncle who had poisoned, manipulated, and groomed Celeste as nothing more than a decoy while he dismantled the empire from the shadows. As the truth surfaced, Aliyah understood with chilling clarity that this man didn't see babies, only leverage, and when the house was tested by alarms, blackouts, and a terrified teenage pawn forced into breaching their defenses, the cruelty of Rowan's methods became undeniable. The final blow came silently, digitally, as every screen lit with a message confirming what they'd lost without a single child being touched, the twins' identities erased, their existence scrubbed from systems and records, turning them into legal ghosts so Rowan could claim them as heirs without resistance. Aliyah nearly broke under the weight of it, until Damien knelt before her and grounded her in truth no system could erase, vowing to fight a war that had now been openly declared. When Rowan finally appeared on screen, smiling, composed, triumphant, congratulating Damien on inheriting a war and announcing the children now belonged to the future he would write, something inside Aliyah hardened into unbreakable resolve. Clutching her babies to her chest, she whispered a promise older than fear itself, while Damien rose beside her, eyes burning with a fire that would not go out, knowing this was no longer just survival, it was the beginning of a fight neither of them intended to lose.